Good morning. My name is Brenna Clanton. I will be your worship lead today. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. As we begin our service, I invite you to close your other windows or apps and devices. If you're here in the sanctuary with us today, I invite you to silence your phones. That's a new thing for me. Not used to doing that. Take a deep breath and center yourself for worship. We begin by calling forth and honoring the people who made us, our biological and spiritual ancestors, teachers, and guides. We call forth those who imagined and made our congregation possible, sustaining it up to this present day. We open and welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on in their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomic Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together shall one day know full justice. Our chalice lighting today is from Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming of multiple truths.
Good morning. We welcome you to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church live stream worship service. I am Sheila Doles, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm happy to be your worship associate today. Accotink UU is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You are welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or background, no matter your means or abilities, you are welcome here in this religious community. If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please be sure to reach out to me, our minister, Rev. William Lovewood, or one of today's greeters using the chat box. On our website, www.accotinkuu.org, you can check the online order of service on the worship section. While you're on the website, be sure to check our events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. Whether you're a longtime member or newcomer or somewhere in between, we encourage you to stay for our virtual coffee hour immediately after this service. We're so delighted that you decided to join us today. Welcome.
I'd like to invite Anna Maria Viveros Long to join me for our time for all ages. And you will see the slides up on the screen. I would also invite anyone who would like to do so after today's service. I'm going to hold this up for the sanctuary, but the book is beautiful. And so if anybody wants to touch the book or look at the book, you will also see us kind of going through the pages. It's not going to be the most graceful. And there is grace. So before we start reading this, I want to just introduce it, and then I'm going to ask Anna Maria to share some memories. We are reading from Pablo Neruda. Did I say his name? Yes, I did justice. Book of Questions. So you may see some questions as a theme today. Let me give you a little bit of background on the writer. Neruda was a Chilean poet, among other things, many other things. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. And when he died in 1973, they found 8 manuscripts on his desk, and this is one of them. The Book of Questions has 316 questions in it. We are not reading all of them. And so for me, it is a book about connections. Paloma Valdivia is the illustrator of this version. And for her connection was that her grandmother was a friend of Neruda's sister. And before we begin, I would like to ask Ana Maria to share her connection with Neruda.
Okay, well, I really want to thank Brenna for inviting me here because it just triggered a childhood memory when I must have been around 11 or 12 years old. I had the privilege of meeting Pablo Neruda in his beach house, where that is the place where he wrote this book, these questions. And it just, we had common acquaintances, and Pablo Neruda was a very gregarious, person, and he would love to invite his neighbors and friends and so my parents were invited, and I came along, and while the adults were talking, whatever, I would just go through his house. It was like a museum because he traveled a lot, and he was a collector, and he collected the most incredible things, from seashells to, the mast of a tree or of a ship or whatever. It was just very, very interesting. And the place, the house where it was just gorgeous, just by the ocean, in a cliff, and in a beach that's called Isla Negra, which surfers probably today love to go because of the waves are really high. So it was just, for me, Pablo Neruda, it was a glimpse in my childhood memories that I thank Brenna for bringing that back up.
Thank you. I'm also grateful to be able to share this with you. So we are going to start. We're going to read some of the questions. Again, the slides are going to show up, and you'll see us alter between the English question and the Spanish question. So why do rocks have so many wrinkles and so many holes?
¿Y para qué tantas arrugas y tanto agujero en la roca?
Does the earth chirp like a cricket in the symphony of the skies?
¿Canta la tierra como un grillo entre la música celeste?
Who shouted for joy when the color blue was born?
¿Quiénes gritaron de alegría cuando nació el color azul?
What irritates volcanoes so much that they spit fire, ice, and fury?
¿Qué cosa irrita a los volcanes que escupen fuego, frío y furia?
How many questions are there in a cat?
¿Cuántas preguntas tiene un gato?
When I look once more at the sea, does the sea see me or not see me?
Cuando veo de nuevo ¿el mar me ha visto o no me ha visto?
Why do the waves ask me the same questions I ask them?
¿Por qué me preguntan las olas lo mismo que yo les pregunto?
Why do trees hide the splendor of their roots?
¿Por qué los árboles esconden el esplendor de sus raíces?
So how do roots know they must rise up to the light?
¿Y cómo saben las raíces que deben subir a la luz?
And later greet the air with crowds of colorful flowers.
Y luego saludar al aire con tantas flores y colores.
Is there room for a few thorns? They asked the rosebush.
¿Hay sitio para unas espinas? Le preguntaron al rosal.
What news burst forth from the leaves on those first days of spring?
¿Qué cuentan de nuevo las hojas de la reciente primavera?
Why don't they teach helicopters how to draw honey from the sun?
¿Por qué no enseñan a sacar miel del sol a los helicópteros?
If flies produced honey, would they offend the bees?
Si las moscas fabrican miel, ¿ofenderán a las abejas?
Why don't those immense airplanes fly side by side with their children?
¿Por qué los inmensos aviones no se pasean con sus hijos?
What's hidden under your hump? Said the camel to the tortoise.
¿Qué guardas bajo tu joroba? Dijo un camello a una tortuga.
And the tortoise asked, what talks are you having with the oranges?
Y la tortuga preguntó, ¿qué conversas con las naranjas?
Don't you think dromedaries hold the moon in their humps?
¿No crees que los dromedarios preservan la luna en sus jorobas?
Don't they sow it in deserts with secret persistence?
¿No la siembran en los desiertos con la persistencia clandestina?
Where can you find a bell that rings inside your dreams?
¿Dónde encontrar una campana que suene adentro de tus sueños?
Where does the stuff of dreams go? Does it pass into the dreams of others?
¿Dónde van las cosas del sueño? ¿Se van al sueño de los otros?
Where does the rainbow end? In your soul or on the horizon?
¿Dónde termina el arco iris? ¿En tu alma o en el horizonte?
Thank you, Anna Maria. So we do not have RE today. And so one thing I want to invite kids and adults together. You may have a piece of paper and a pencil near you. It is completely optional. But if you are moved at any point to write down a favorite question, like about the cat with the question, so many questions, which explains so much about my cat, you are welcome to do so. So today we have a chance to look at our family stories, and we begin with questions. So I would like to share a prompt that I was graded on last week for class. It was assigned for my worship class, and the prompt is from a professor of mine, Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout, who is also the director of Worship of Arts for First Universalist Church of Minneapolis. So when I asked him about the prompt, it is actually based on a hymn in the Teal hymnal. Not based on it, but it also intersects or is there as well. The three questions are the English translation of a title of the French painter Paul Gauguin's final piece. And then we will also hear the hymn that those words are based on later in our service. So the exact assignment was in 50 words exactly, answer the following three questions. Where do you come from? What are you? Where are you going? So I invite you to sit with those questions. You are welcome to write them, or if it feels like a picture, really feel those questions if you would like. We will return to them later in today's service.
Breakage, a poem by Mary Oliver. I go down to the edge of the sea. How everything shines in the morning light. The cusp of the whelk, the broken cupboard of the clam, the open blue mussels, moon snails, pale pink and barnacle scarred, and nothing at all whole or shut, but tattered, split, dropped by the gulls onto the gray rocks and all the moisture gone. It's like a schoolhouse of little words, thousands of words. First, you figure out what each means by itself. The jingle, the periwinkle, the scallop, full of moonlight. Then you begin, slowly, to read the whole story.
So I'm going to talk about questions today, and also talk about our family stories. And I'm going to be pulling from a couple of different sources. And you'll hear me talk about a book that Rav Lev recommended to me called Wounds into Wisdom. It's by Rabbi Tirzai Firestone. So in her book, Wounds into Wisdom, Rabbi Firestone says, our stories are at the heart of human connection. They are also at the heart of our healing. So not only will I pull from the book today, but I'll also pull from my own experiences. And again, feel free to write and doodle as you feel so moved throughout our time together. And if it feels right, you are also welcome to just listen. With those three questions, I love the answers that come forward with them. And I'll return to it at the end and share my version. I actually recorded a quick video of it. I'll share it to you live today, not the homegrown video. But according to Rabbi Firestone, asking questions is in itself an exercise of personal agency. If you think about it, it allows you to pause and stop for a moment and really take things in. Questions can take on the form of poetry. So if you think about the question poetry, like Neruda's, in our time for all ages today, the questions from his book turn into one epic poem that invites the reader into self-reflection. And just as you start to think about a question, another one comes. For me, as I first read that, it allowed me to shift my view. I never thought about having conversations with oranges, or maybe that the volcano was angry or the cat had questions. I love that they make room for the unexpected. And perhaps in some of them, you find the greater truth. So here's a question I've thought about a lot over the past few years. How do I honor loved ones who are no longer on this earth with me? And how does their story show up in mine? It felt appropriate to talk about on this weekend, Memorial Day weekend. And this was originally, I always like to do the history for myself. Back in 1868, it was originally for the fallen soldiers of the Civil War. And then over time, it expanded for all of America's wars. the year I was born. So I'll date myself here. I know there are some in here that have said, you're not allowed to ask age, but 50 years ago, it was passed into law. A day to be marked on the last Monday of May. So for me, my grandfather shows up, my dad's dad, on this weekend. He fought in World War II. He was stationed in the South Pacific for 32 months. It's probably not uncommon. I didn't hear a lot of stories about that time. And I have some letters that he wrote to my grandmother. In them, he mentions just daily ongoings, like the rifle training or that the mud is a foot thick. He does talk about what it will be like when he returns. And one of my favorite lines is, I'll bet tears of joy will come into my eyes, and I will stand for an hour not even being able to talk. He was at home on leave in 1945 when the war ended. He didn't have to return to active duty. And like so many that come back from hard situations like war, he came back with wounds. Only as I put the story together, his were more emotional wounds, not physical wounds. Often there can be a tendency to numb one's wounds with something else, like alcohol, or hide those wounds underneath emotions, such as anger. When I was a child, my grandfather no longer drank, yet I was afraid of him. We would visit every summer, and at that time, he worked at a local auto shop. And when he came home every evening, he was covered in grease and oil, and I remember that it wasn't just the grease-stained clothes that prevented me from running up to him to give him a hug. I experienced an invisible barrier of getting closer to him. I recall that he softened as I grew older, and I was often envious of my younger cousins who were able to enjoy a gentler version of my grandfather. So there's a word that I think a lot about when I think about stories like the story of my grandfather, and I hear it a lot more, and that's integration. The idea of bringing our past experiences into a cohesive narrative, a story about our life. And we can integrate many things. We can integrate childhood memories, challenges we've had, or even trauma we've experienced. So a couple of years ago, I did a deeper dive into sort of generational integration. What was it like when my ancestors came over from Ireland in the 1860s, for example? And I read every historical book possible I could get my hands on. Part of my motivation was to figure out what makes me tick and see what patterns I might be repeating from previous generations. The subtitle of Rabbi Firestone's book is Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma. So Wounds into Wisdom, Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma. And yet, despite her focus on the Jewish culture, her work also has universal applications. I'd like to read from the jacket cover. It really spoke to me. It says, "Our past does not simply disappear. The painful history of our ancestors and their rich cultural wisdom intertwine within us to create the patterns of our future. Even when past trauma remains unspoken or has long been forgotten, it becomes part of us and our children, a legacy of both strength and woundedness that shapes our lives." And indeed, she recounts how she and her 5 siblings ultimately reenacted the volatile climate of their parents' home. Secrets and stuffed feelings, the choices that may have felt like the best thing to do at the time, keep emerging in generations that follow in unexpected places. For me, I saw how my patterns of stuffing feelings reflected the model that I grew up with. I could only tamp my feelings down for so long until they came out sideways, almost explosive like that volcano in Neruda's Question. So I want to pause for a moment and just name how hard this is. I'm not an expert on integration. There are many ways of doing this. So during my own search, I've found it important not to do this work alone. It is imperative that we surround ourselves with the support networks that we need. And this can be our church community, the small groups that many of us have participated in, support groups, professional counselors, anyone who can provide a safe container for the work of integrating our past. Container allows us to acknowledge how important this work is and the power it has, but it also offers us boundaries as well. So I do want to encourage anyone who feels moved to reach out today. I will be available after today's service, and for anyone who's online and also wishes to speak to someone within the church community, you'll let one of the board or let one of the hosts know on Zoom, and we can help you, connect you to someone. This work of integration is important. For me, I've found that it allows me to show up more authentically to all of the other work I do. So for example, I can come into my social justice work as a more grounded person. And a couple of things are really important as we do this. It's having that safe witness. So if I think about the Soul Matters group that I participate in, that for me is having people witness my story. It also takes time. So in our culture of needing that answer right away, right now, this is not that work. So just briefly, a safe witness is someone who can hold what I'm saying without reactivity, without judgment, criticism, without trying to find a solution for me. And in terms of taking time, it took a while for me to piece together my own family story. And I do remember at first I didn't feel like speaking or sharing about it at all. And it was being in a place where other people were willing to do so that allowed me to feel like I could. And as I've done this work, I've found that another thing has shown up, and that's me being able to witness this. I've become more attuned, and I find that that is part of that process. One thing that's helped me in this process is journaling, and so that was one of the reasons I brought out the paper and pencils for today. And I want to share an exercise that I did in a work context called Step Inside This House. So in my current job, I have been facilitating some ally circles. And late last year, my team created a storytelling experiment to show that greater connection occurs when we share our stories with each other. During the initial experiment, I work for a company that part of what we do is software development. So for anyone else who knows the term agile, we had a survey, same questions, we asked questions, there's that theme again, but we asked them at the beginning and then again at the end. And we were able to prove our hypothesis, although we weren't dealing with software development, but we were able to prove our hypothesis that within our work environment, sharing stories with others allows us to feel more connected with each other. So the exercise is another song with a house in the title. I was grateful that I got to hear one of my favorite songs by Miranda Lambert, The House That Built Me. But Step Inside This House is a song made popular by Lyle Lovett. I think it was written by Guy Clark. And the lyrics actually take you through a house and what's important to the singer. So there's a lyric, for example, that picture hanging on the wall was painted by a friend. Now, it doesn't look like much, I guess, but it's all I have of him. And so in a virtual meeting, we invited the participants to write down things that were important to them. I think we had 3 categories. It was people and pets, it was customs, and it was objects. And again, I'm happy to give the resources for this experiment. I think Essential Partners was the nonprofit that came up with this. So a community nonprofit organization. And throughout the exercise, we kept saying, please keep your pen writing. You won't know what shows up. And eventually we had a process of elimination where they had, depending on how they did it, one thing that was especially important. Maybe they had 3, but then we moved them into breakout sessions where they were with one other person, a safe witness, and they were able to share their story. And if anyone here has been part of a Soul Matters group, it's the same principles applied here. It was the listener listened and then recounted what they heard and what was really striking to them. It was such a powerful exercise for me and from what I heard from others to really be seen and heard with your personal stories. I had a really touching experience the last circle that we ran. I was partnered with someone that I had never met before, that is often common, and even though she did not have her video on, somehow we both had picked our grandfathers. And for me, it was a story of when I was 6 and I had gone to the beach for the first time, and there was a seashell that was about to be washed back into the ocean. I was dreadfully fearful of the waves. I had never seen the ocean before and managed to run in and grab that shell. And my grandfather showed up because he was the one who first introduced me to the beach. Growing up in the Midwest, I was pretty landlocked, well, except for Lake Michigan. But the beach was something new. And my partner also selected her grandfather. So there was some serendipity in all of this. But as I listened to her tell me about how her grandfather raised her, could not see her on video, and I could hear the tenderness in her words. And I heard her say at the end, I didn't expect to cry. And how grateful to be a person who could have received that story from her. So I'm going to close now with those 3 questions that we started earlier today with and have sung. Where do I come from? What am I? And where am I going? One of the reasons I suggested that you might want to doodle or draw is it can become an embodied practice to ask these questions. I have a creek nearby that I try to go to on a daily basis, and I found myself recording those 50 words. It's almost like you could ask me those questions and it'll come up now. It's that ingrained in me. For me, I come from myself, from County Galway, Ireland, from Chicago, South Side, West Side, and all the sidewalks in between. I'm a work in progress, imperfect, compassionate. I am love. I'm going to the creek, to a place of curiosity, toward what is just and kind and true. Thank you for letting me share that with you. And my hope is that if each of us is able to look deeply into our own stories, that we may all move to a place of greater healing, and that we are able to show up, to do our meaningful work from a place of even more wholeness and authenticity. So blessed be, and amen.
Though we will extinguish our chalice flame, we carry within us what we kindled, the light of inspiration, warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out into the world. I invite you now to stand, if you'd like, if you're here in person, and extend your hands. If you're at home, you could extend your hands too, if you so wish. Let us recite our community blessing with these words of David Bumba. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
We come from those who were here before us, and we connect with each other when we open our hearts and share what is deep within. May we step inside this house together. Amen.